guys, welcome back. Now, we've talked about Saturday mornings on here before, and for good reason. Saturday mornings back in the 80s and 90s were sacred. We could sleep in, eat as much cereal as we could stomach, and then watch some weird random cartoon that you'd see one week and then probably never see again. And there were tons of those back then because networks would greenlight just about anything. And even if they somehow just barely lasted a season on TV, some of them actually ended up with a video game as well. So today we're digging up 4 of the most forgotten Super Nintendo games based on cartoons that you probably haven't thought about in 30 years. And trust me, there's probably a reason for some of these. But let's get the cartoons rolling with one that I doubt hardly any of you, at least here in the US, remember at all. Hurricanes for the Super Nintendo was a game based on a cartoon that barely even existed in the US. And after playing it, I think I can see why. So this is going to be a weird one. Raise your hands if you remember Hurricanes. Now I'm going to go out on a limb and say that about 98% of the US audience watching this video right now has no clue that this ever existed. It seems like this was more of a European thing because it got several episodes over there. But apparently the US did get one season of it on Fox Kids at some point. Now I have zero memory of ever seeing this on TV over here, but I'm going to go ahead and trust Wikipedia on this one and just assume that it actually aired. And I guess it's not really surprising, a cartoon about a heroic soccer team constantly battling an evil soccer team that's always up to no good. Yeah, that never stood a chance over here. And that probably explains why the Super Nintendo game based on the cartoon never bothered to make the trip. Hurricanes hit the Super Nintendo back in 1994, but only in PAL territories. That's game lingo for Euro country, if you're not familiar. Apparently, the show was actually popular enough over there to warrant a full game. Unfortunately, the back of the box looks so generic that it could literally be any Super Nintendo game, with temple ruins and jungles not exactly screaming soccer to me. But hey, I'm always down for some generic platforming, so maybe we'll be pleasantly surprised by this soccer adventure. Kick your way into the game and the Hurricanes plays like a mix between a standard platformer and Soccer Kid. And if you've never played Soccer Kid, it's basically a better version of this game. Soccer Kid controls like your typical hop and bop platformer, but your main weapon is your soccer ball. You use it to take out enemies, hit switches, and pull off some pretty clever stuff. Hurricanes though, yeah, this ain't that. The ball here barely has any physics to it, and it only goes out about 5 feet in front of you whenever you do kick it. More like a bad projectile that you have to wait to come back before you can use it again. And that's a big problem in a game that loves to send enemies at you faster than you can react to most of them. Oh, and if your ball touches something sharp, it explodes and flies off the screen. And I'll admit that is cute the first time it happens, but it happens all the time, and you have to wait a few seconds for a new ball to respawn. You can do a shorter kick that kind of punts the ball up into the air to hit enemies that are flying around, though most of the time it just misses them completely. There's a super kick that you can charge up by holding a button down, but it's so slow that you never get a chance to use it. Plus, for whatever reason, you can't actually use the super kick during boss fights. So really, you're just kind of stuck with the standard kick and dealing with how bad it feels. And yeah, it feels really bad. Your character moves with these super floaty physics, and when you combine that with all the stiff, awkward attacks, you get a game that feels like someone's just tossing a corpse around. Oh, and special thanks to whoever thought it would be a good idea to make your character stop and do a little fall animation every time they get near a ledge. In a game where you have to get to the edge of every platform just to make your jumps. The stages themselves are at least mostly serviceable, with some decently fun locations like the aforementioned temple ruins and a dirty train, I guess. But getting around them is just grody. It just feels nasty to play through them. There's no clear direction most of the time, and the platforms in particular are a pain in the ass. Half the time they don't even register unless you're standing dead center. And of course, this is one of those games that knocks you back whenever you get hit, while at the same time constantly throwing enemies and projectiles at you non-stop. You just never really feel in control moving around the world, more like you're just reacting and hoping that you got enough health to endure until the next checkpoint. The bosses are at least so simple that they barely feel like they showed up. Most of them only have a single attack, and once you figure out how to dodge that, you'll never get hit again. Now, it is possible that I'm playing this game completely wrong, but honestly, this is the best that I could figure out. The instructions barely explain anything, like how you pick up a bunch of items as you play, but for the most part, I had no clue what any of them actually did. So I checked the manual, hoping that it would explain a little bit, and I was told, and I quote, "There are numerous items to be discovered with a vast range of different effects, some of which are delayed." And that's it. Like, that's all it says about the items. Thanks, I guess. I'll just go figure it out on my own. But really, I ain't got much else to say about this one. Hurricanes for the Super Nintendo is more of an oddity than anything else. Again, I'll let the folks across the pond chime in on this in the comments, because maybe this was a bigger deal over there. But just going by the gameplay alone in this one, Hurricanes ain't very good. It's like a dollar store version of Soccer Kid, and Soccer Kid was already a dollar store version of its own damn self. It's one of those games where the license is literally the only thing holding it up, and I'm gonna hope that it was at least enough for the European kids that played this back in the day. Still, if you're a collector of obscure Super Nintendo curiosities, Hurricanes is a decent little weirdo to throw on your shelf, if only just to confuse your friends. But just like the cartoon that it's based on, it came and went without leaving much of a mark. And honestly, that might be the best thing about the whole damn game. Swat Kats for the Super Nintendo might not blow your socks off, but if you were all in on the cartoon, it's definitely enough to sink your claws into. Now, I'm gonna hope that I'm not the only Swat Kats fan here, because I always thought it was a pretty cool cartoon, at least whenever I could catch it on. Swat Kats was an early 90s Hanna-Barbera series about two renegade feline pilots, Chance T-Bone Furlong and Jake Razor Clawson, who protected Mega Cat City by doing the whole vigilante heroes by night thing, using their heavily armored jet, the Turbo Cat, to take down evildoers around the city. It only ran for like 2 seasons on TBS or something like that, but it built a pretty big cult following thanks to its edgier style and the simple fact that Cats flying fighter jets will always be awesome. Oh, and you may want to sit down for this one, but it also got a video game too. Swat Kats flew onto the Super Nintendo back in 1995 with box art that looked like it was ready to rip your whole damn face off. This right here, this is why kids like Swat Kats. Unfortunately, the back of the box is way less exciting since there's barely anything here. Still, it looks like they did toss in some Turbo Cat levels, and that could be pretty cool. So let's find out if these kitties still have their fangs on the Super Nintendo or if they're just coughing up hairballs on their way to the clearance bin. And the game definitely starts off looking the part. It does a solid job of capturing that dark, gritty vibe of the cartoon, especially with the color palette. Everything's a little on the small side for a Super Nintendo game though, but considering the developers clearly took some cues from Mega Man X for this game, you can kinda see what they were going for. Still, even with the smaller sprites, the characters and enemies look great, and the stages even throw in some really cool stuff, like a giant sludge monster tearing through the background or a deranged theme park complete with killer rides. And yes, you do get to hop into the Turbo Cat for some Mode 7 style flying segments where you blast away at enemies. So for what it's worth, Swat Kats at least nails the visuals and the vibe that made the show so memorable. Once you're in the game, you get to pick your Swat Cat of choice. Both characters handle more or less the same, but each come with their own unique special weapon. T-Bone gets a grenade launcher that lets him blow up barricades and open up areas Razor can't reach, while Razor gets a jetpack that lets him float up to places that T-Bone can't. And as much as I'd love to say this choice drastically changes the game, it really doesn't. Both characters have their moments, but if I had to pick, I'd probably just go with T-Bone. His launcher's way less finicky than Razor's jetpack, which can be kind of a pain to control. Once you've picked your character, you get to choose your stage, and from there, it's more or less your standard action platformer. Again, the Mega Man X influence here is obvious, and if you like those games, you'll have a rough idea of what to expect here. It doesn't always hit the mark though, and we'll get to why here in just a second. But probably the most interesting thing that the game does is toss in a full leveling system that upgrades your health and your attack as you gain experience. You earn experience by defeating enemies and picking up coins scattered throughout the stages. And this is actually something you'll want to focus on, because those stat boosts make a huge difference in how difficult the game is. You can even grind for XP if you want in this game, and it's a totally legit way to make the harder areas more manageable. It's a little clunky in how it's implemented, but a system like this was almost unheard of in anything that wasn't an RPG back then. And here's Swat Kats over here, of all things, casually tossing in a mechanic that wouldn't become common in action games until years later. So yeah, I think that deserves a little bit of respect. But Swat Kats definitely has some issues that bring the whole experience back down to earth. One of the biggest is your main attack, the Glovatrix. It's a glove that fires out different types of missiles depending on your level, which sounds cool, but in practice, not so much. Even at higher levels, your shots only travel a few feet out in front of you, and they never feel like they have any sort of real impact. It's more like you're firing a foam dart rather than something like a missile, and when your main attack feels this weak, it really drags down the rest of the combat. But that might be for the best though, considering just how stiff the rest of this game feels. It's not awful, but you really have to get used to it. Remember how in Hurricanes it just felt like your character was sliding all over the place? Well, Swat Kats has the exact opposite problem. Your character has almost no inertia here. The jump in particular just feels really weird. It's slightly delayed and completely lacks any sort of weight to it. Even wall jumps feel like the game's guiding you to a preset landing spot sometimes. There's just no sense of momentum at all. And unfortunately, the stages don't help much either. They've got some good theming, since each level has you going after one of the show's villains and their henchmen, but the design is just kinda bland. Just like the controls, there's no real momentum to these stages. Some areas go on way too long. Others have nothing happening for long stretches. Some have so much stuff going on you can't keep up. And then there's some stages that just recycle the same sections over and over. There's no real consistency with them. And while those Turbo Cat stages are a cool idea, I hope you don't get motion sickness too easy, because 5 minutes in and you are gonna be ready to barf all over the place. At least that's how I felt. Overall though, Swat Kats is actually surprisingly decent, even with all of its problems. If you were a fan of the cartoon, I could totally see this being a fun weekend rental. The controls are stiff, the combat feels weak, and the level design kinda drags sometimes. But for what it is, it's still pretty entertaining, and there's a decent amount of game here to sink your claws into. It's not gonna blow your drawers off or anything like that, but it also doesn't belong in the trash. And if you love the show, then these flying kitties might just be enough for a fun weekend. Jim Lee's Wildcats for the Super Nintendo was always a fun comic book, but it couldn't quite stick the landing as a Saturday morning cartoon or a video game. Alright guys, it's time to talk about Jim Lee's Wildcats, and if you were a comic book kid in the early 90s, there's a pretty good chance you at least heard of this one. It came out during that early Image Comics explosion, with Jim Lee doing the same over-the-top, hyper-detailed style that he made famous at Marvel. And for a while, Wildcats was actually one of Image's more successful titles that wasn't Spawn. But around the same time, X-Men the Animated Series was absolutely tearing it up on Fox Kids, and CBS decided to try their luck with Wildcats in their own Saturday morning lineup. Unfortunately, the show only lasted a single season back in 1994, and mostly just came off like a trashier-looking X-Men, which it clearly wanted to be. But that still didn't stop Playmates from stepping in to give us a Wildcats game that same year. And before the comic book crowd starts yelling at me, the game is actually based on the cartoon and not the comic, at least as far as I can tell. But I mean, honestly, the back of the box doesn't do a great job of selling you on either one, since it's one of those boxes that's more concerned with handing you a word salad than actually showing you why you should play it. But don't worry, because it doesn't take long for you to realize that you've just jumped into this channel's favorite genre, a beat-em-up. You start off as Spartan, the Wildcats' de facto leader, and he's got your standard punch combo and a throw, but also a bioenergy blast that he can charge up to fire off a Cyclops-style beam across the screen. You can even grab an item that lets you charge it up further for a bigger, stronger blast, though it takes longer for you to actually power it up. And you'll usually be swarmed long before you get to melt faces with it. Overall though, first impressions aren't terrible. The game looks decent and the characters are frickin' huge for a Super Nintendo game with zero slowdown, which is actually pretty impressive. But it doesn't take long to notice that the gameplay's definitely on the more rigid side of the scale. Still though, as long as this doesn't turn into endless waves of enemies that take way too many hits to put down, we should be in pretty good shape here. In the meantime though, once you clear the first stage of Spartan, the game opens up and gives you 2 more characters to choose from, each with their own set of stages. Maul's the big Hulk-style bruiser, and while he looks massive, he really doesn't hit as hard as he looks like he should. He can at least do a ground slam that looks hilarious, but it's great for knocking down enemies with, and he's also got the coolest throw in the game where he just yeets dudes into the air and then punches them into oblivion. Warblade is a little bit more interesting. He can morph his arms into literal blades and then stab enemies with said blades. He can even scale walls like the budget Wolverine Spider-Man hybrid that he is. He also gets a double jump and an air dash, giving him by far the most mobility. But the moment the game actually makes you use him, you'll probably wish you didn't have him. But more on that here in a second. Each character also gets screen-clearing bombs that you can collect, but beyond that, there's not much else going on as far as how you play this thing. And the more you do play, the more it becomes clear that it really doesn't matter who you're using, since each character just pretty much feels more or less the same. Spartan's Laser Blast is probably the only move that slightly changes things up a little bit, since it actually gives you a ranged attack, but everything else just kind of feels samey. The game is at least kinda laid out in a neat way where you have to switch back and forth between characters for them to complete their objectives. It's an interesting idea, but it really doesn't matter who you play or what order they're in. Just think of it more as each character tagging out when their section ends. And honestly, it kind of feels like the developers just did this to break up the monotony a little bit. Because if you had to play each one of these levels all the way through in one go, you'd probably just lose your goddamn mind from the repetition of it all. And that's unfortunately where Wildcats falls apart. There's just not enough here to break up how repetitive this game is. But really, even if your character had a dozen attacks at their disposal, it wouldn't matter, because you're stuck fighting the same 5 enemies for the entire game, and they don't go down quick. You do get the occasional break with an environmental obstacle or one of Warblade's wall climbing sections, but those are so clunky and frustrating, they'll make you want to shut the game off in a fit of rage. It's just a slog of a game most of the time. Now you guys know me and you know that I like my beat-em-ups, and at first I was actually having a little bit of fun with Wildcats. Sure, it's another super stiff Super Nintendo brawler with barely any attack variety, but I mean, I'm okay with that because I like that kind of stuff. Hell, I played through a good chunk of the Tick. But once I hit the second set of stages and realized that nothing is changing, that's when the fun started bleeding out. And the game went from, this ain't too bad, to me just wondering how much more I had to play to get enough footage for this video. Honestly, it just kind of reminds me of a worse version of X-Men Children of the Atom for the Super Nintendo, and that's a much better way to go unless you're just really into Wildcats. But hey, I mean, if you can push through the tedium, you might have more fun with this than I did. Though in the end, you're probably just better off reading the comics or even just watching the cartoon to get your Wildcats fix. Because this painfully repetitive Super Nintendo brawler just doesn't pack enough superpowered punch to justify the effort. Pirates of Dark Water for the Super Nintendo brings a surprisingly solid dose of high seas action, and for once delivers more than just a cheap cartoon cash-in. I think Pirates of Dark Water is one of those early 90s cartoons that you either loved with every fiber of your being or just had no idea it even existed. Personally, I could just never seem to catch it on TV much as a kid, but when I did, it always stood out as one of the weirder and more ambitious shows of the time. You could tell a lot of thought and passion went into building the world as you followed Rin, a prince trying to stop a creeping evil substance called Dark Water from consuming the world, all while being chased by a disgusting fat pirate and sailing around with his ragtag crew of rebels and monkey birds. And actually, that's a pretty dang cool idea for a Saturday morning cartoon. Plus, it had some really good animation and a surprisingly serious tone for a kid's show. But like most things in the 90s, it got canceled before the story could actually be finished. But that didn't stop it from getting a couple of video games released, and surprisingly, the Super Nintendo version holds up better than you'd probably expect. The Pirates of Dark Water sailed onto the Super Nintendo back in 1994, promising all of the action of the cartoon in a Sunsoft-developed beat-em-up. But when you flip the box over, you're greeted with a big old block of text, hyping up killer graphics and sound that's apparently hot enough to make you sweat. There's also a handful of screenshots so zoomed in that it's kind of hard to tell what you're even looking at. So, I mean, yeah, the box probably could have done a better job at selling the game, but hey, at least I'm looking forward to these pirates making me sweat for whatever reason. Start up Pirates of Dark Water and you're greeted with a full recap of the cartoon story, which makes sense since I'm guessing most kids at the time hadn't actually seen the cartoon. And to its credit, the game does a pretty good job of catching you up on that Dark Water lore. After that, you pick from 3 main characters that all fall very neatly into the standard beat-em-up playstyle. Rin's your all-arounder since he's quick but not too weak, and overall just feels like the most capable fighter. Ayaz is the big burly pirate who hits the hardest but isn't too fast on his feet. And Tula is the fast but weak character, which kinda sucks because in the cartoon she was kind of a mage. And aside from her super move, she's just kinda stuck in the usual fast girl role that every beat-em-up handed to female characters back then. But I mean, at least they're all here, I guess, and they're all surprisingly fun to play as. And since this is a Sunsoft-developed brawler, you at least know that you're in capable hands here. And Pirates of Dark Water ends up being a solid beat-em-up. Even your basic punch combo feels satisfying here, with some decent impact, and there's a lot of beat-em-ups that never got that part right. You've also got just enough wiggle room to pull off the classic beat-em-up 1-2 combo, where you punch a guy a few times, grab him, then knee him in the guts a couple of times, and finally hurl him into his buddies. And if you're into that kind of thing, then this is actually one of the more fun games to do it in. And while I wouldn't say the stages are the most exciting things to look at, they do have some fun obstacles that are perfect for luring brain-dead pirates into. And a few neat one-off moments, like freeing a trapped monkey bird, or just having to slam enemies onto the ground enough times to knock a health item off the top of a crate. And just about every stage has small details like that, stuff most beat-em-ups never bothered with, even though it actually really helps break up the constant waves of enemies. And Lord have mercy, this game needs it, because these pirates just don't know when to call it quits. Because the pacing in this game is a major issue, and the stages just drag on for way too long. And after the first level, enemies start taking a lot more hits to take down. And even when you do take them down, you're almost guaranteed at least 3 more waves of them before you can move on. Put those together and every stage feels twice as long as it needs to be. And no matter how good the gameplay is, slogging through endless waves of enemies is a fast track to burnout, especially in a beat-em-up. But if you can live with that slow pacing, then the rest of the game is shockingly decent. And maybe it's just because I came off trying to endure Wildcats, but I had a lot of fun with this one. It's easily one of the better licensed beat-em-ups on the system. And I mean, it's not top tier like Turtles in Time or something like that, but it is a solid brawler all around. It even has 2-player co-op, so if you got a buddy around, you can sail these seas together. So yeah, I think this one actually ended up being the surprise of the week for me, especially since I didn't really care that much for it back when I rented it as a kid. But these days though, it's pretty good stuff. And I definitely think that these Dark Waters on the Super Nintendo are worth exploring. I think that's going to do it for me this week, guys, since I think this proves once and for all that maybe not every cartoon needed a video game. But if nothing else, these Saturday morning rejects are a weird little time capsule of when studios would just slap a license on anything and hope for the best. And if you've got any forgotten cartoon games that you remember renting or regretting, let me know in the comments below. And hey, if you like this trip through the bargain bin, go ahead and give this video a like, and maybe even consider subscribing for some more licensed disasters in the future. But that's all I got this week, kids. Check back next week for a bunch more games to chat about. But until then, thanks for watching.